everyone, this is PK Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be my spoiler review of Deadpool and Wolverine. Now this won't be a chronological breakdown of the film itself, but just more of a free-flowing discussion of the main highlights within the movie itself, and what elements worked well and what elements worked not quite as well. So the first element we're going to talk about, which we might as well do, the one thing that everybody's discussing, especially online, is of course the various amount of cameo appearances by certain characters and actors. And the first one we're going to talk about, of course, will be the appearance of Henry Cavill. Now this came within the earlier stages of the film when Deadpool is searching around for all of the different versions of Wolverine to help maintain his timeline, which is the main plot of the overall movie. And we see here where he encounters somebody within like a kind of a warehouse, and we see the big bulky physique here, and we do wonder who it is. Maybe it's Hugh Jackman making another different appearance, and then the person turns around and we see that it's Henry Cavill. We see his hair is all curly and he's got a moustache and beard, so this surely must have been around about the time that he was also filming the Guy Ritchie film The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, because you can see he has the same makeup as what he had for playing the lead character within that film. And it was very interesting when we see all of these cameos, what exactly the actors were doing in terms of other projects, whilst also making time to make an appearance within this film itself. But to be honest, this cameo wasn't really nothing substantial. It's literally 20-30 seconds. He just glances over. Deadpool makes the remark about how crappy he was treated by the very studio, which is of course DC. And to be fair, this is right, this is something that everybody knows. I've said this on multiple videos and multiple commentaries about the DCU, that I still firmly believe that Henry Cavill had the potential to be a great Superman. It was just that his role and his overall participation was grossly mishandled by DC, both in terms of movies and also characterization. And to be honest, it's a subject that's been discussed ad infinitum at this point. I think we all know that the Snyderverse is over. A lot of the fandom, minus the Snyder Cut fan base, have moved on, and to be honest, Henry Cavill has moved on. So it's not really worth discussing it. It was just a joke that was relevant at this point in time, but nothing's going to be further developed on from that going forward. As we all know, the James Gunn Superman project is coming forward next year with David Corenswet in the lead role. So it's not really worth discussing any further than that. It was a decent joke, nothing more than that. The next cameo that I think was probably the best one out of the whole film was the one made by Chris Evans. Now this involves the later stage where we see that both Deadpool and Wolverine have been transported to the Void, where other variants who have disobeyed orders of the Time variants or are deemed too troublesome are transported to, and we see them in this barren wasteland Mad Max setting, and they make references to that joke and Furiosa constantly throughout this passage of the film. And then we see Chris Evans appear after a hooded person points to the traffic in the distance, and of course we all feel that there will be some sort of reference to his role as Captain America, because of course this is Deadpool's first entry within the MCU. And we have that scene where Chris Evans is talking and Deadpool is highly anticipating him saying Avengers Assemble, and then he says Flame On, and we see him appear in the Fantastic Four costume. And of course this was very surprising, because we've all failed to remember or lost memory of the fact that Chris Evans did indeed play HumanTorch in the Fantastic Four films. So it was very surprising, but of course it made complete sense. And this was the best cameo because it was the one cameo that they actually stuck with the longest, and I think it was one of the more successful jokes, because they intertwined it more with the story, as we see later on that the characters come across Cassandra Nova, who was the main villain, and essentially Deadpool gets Chris Evans killed, where he remarks the fact that he was dissing her behind her back, and we get that gruesome moment where she basically skins him alive. And I thought Chris Evans was great here. It's always good to see him exhibit much more of a varied personality, because in his role as Captain America he had of course played a more super stoic hero. And again, like Henry Cavill, I do think Chris Evans is an actor who, given the right role and the right script, could actually produce something of a worthwhile performance. It's just very difficult to see these actors other than the iconic superheroes that they play. And this really was one of the funniest moments within the film, and they actually carried it through all the way to the end credit scene, which overall works very well. So we'll then talk about the second best cameo appearance, and that is of course the return of Wesley Snipes as Blade. This was following the scene where, after an extended fight between both Deadpool and Wolverine inside the car, we see them both getting captured, and then later on they wake up and Wolverine is boozing away on a bottle of whiskey. And then we see the appearance first of Jennifer Garner's Elektra, and I had to look once or twice before figuring out who it was. And then we see Wesley Snipes enter, and I have to say that, again, this was very much surprising, given the history between both Wesley Snipes and Ryan Reynolds. For anybody who doesn't know, there was very much of a fractured relationship on the third film of the Blade franchise, Blade Trinity. Rumours about Wesley Snipes turning up late, not prepared, and not having a good relationship with Ryan Reynolds. Something, again, to which they remark throughout this scene. And of course, despite being older, Wesley Snipes still looked good. He still looked good in the costume, and when we had that extended fight sequence when they're taking on all of Casanova's gang, we saw little clips here of Wesley Snipes still doing the martial arts moves and maneuvers, and he still looks convincing enough. And this ties into the whole troubled production behind MCU's Blade version, something I still don't understand. It's Blade, he has a big sword, he goes out taking vampires, that's all you need. But for some reason, Marvel continues to struggle. But seeing Wesley Snipes back in this movie, it does make you think that Marvel could do a lot worse than scrapping their ongoing plans for the film starring Mahershala Ali and getting Wesley Snipes back for a fourth and final Blade film within his own franchise. Now, of course, Wesley Snipes would have to get back in shape, but he still looked in decent condition in this movie. So a good 6 to 8 month training routine would see him very much look like the Blade for the most part that we've come to renown, especially from the first 2 movies. With Deadpool's own inclusion to the MCU, Marvel is starting to now embrace the more R-rated sensibilities within its own universe. We saw that to an extent also with the Echo series. So would it really be that much of a downturn if they were to give Wesley Snipes an opportunity to play the character one more time, to give a convincing swan song and very much remedy the mistake that was made for Blade Trinity? We've seen in the past Hugh Jackman himself get his own swan song with Logan to wrap that character up. Eddie Murphy, of course, got the chance to play Axel Foley for one more time in Beverly Hills Cop 4. So surely Wesley Snipes could at least be given the opportunity to see if he could play the character one more time. And I probably would have to say at this point, a Wesley Snipes fourth Blade film would probably be more successful than any Blade film made by the MCU. So just great to see him in this role once more. And of course, feeding off that scene, we had the other surprising cameo, which was Channing Tatum as Gambit. Now, of course, if you've been following movies, you would know that at some point, when the X-Men films are really finding their prominence within the Fox universe, there were plans to have a Gambit solo movie with Channing Tatum in the lead role, and that didn't come to pass. Now, of course, seeing him here in this costume and putting off the accent, we can all see why. And they played off that. They played off that very well, given the fact that Channing Tatum wasn't really suitable for the role, and the film was aware of that. And he did not look good in that costume at all. I think it was more the headpiece. It just didn't really suit him. I think in terms of playing Gambit, you need somebody who's probably a bit more slender, because that's the overall design of the character. He's not this big, bulky, muscular type of character in the same way as Superman or Captain America. He's much more lean, much more quick and mobile. So Channing Tatum really wasn't suitable enough for this role. But again, it was a fun cameo. And I would say that he actually looked decent in the action set piece, that big battle that I mentioned already, where we see him pirouetting and using all of his kinetic energy with all the cards and his stick. It looked convincing enough. So it was really in keeping with the overall tone of the film. And one just hope that when we do eventually see the live action version of Gambit with the upcoming X-Men within the MCU, that they certainly do improve a lot on what we saw within this version here. So in terms of the other cameos, both with Jennifer Garner's Elektra and also X-23, they didn't really hold any weight. Of course, we had one scene with X-23 and Wolverine 2/3 of the way through, and this was just really recycling the more angst-ridden, emotional scenes that we saw between them in their relationships in Logan. It was fine, it was well acted enough, but nothing really substantial like a lot of this movie itself. We'll then talk about the overall representation of Wolverine himself. And first of all, we look at all of the costumes. As I mentioned before, near the beginning of the film, as Deadpool was looking for the right variant of Wolverine, we had all of the various versions that we've seen throughout the comic books. So we had the original brown and yellow costume. We had later on the alternative future version of Wolverine from the Agent of Apocalypse storyline, where we see that he has his hand chopped off and he has that metal casing as a substitute. We had later on the Wolverine that was within the casino, and I believe this was a reference also to his participation alongside the Grey Incredible Hulk. We also had a version of the Old Man Logan, which we all are very well familiar with that overall comic book storyline, and that's what they also adapted for the movie itself. And I have to say, in all of these scenes, Hugh Jackman looked absolutely great. I think overall he has been a great representation of the character. Yes, he has been the only one, but no doubt about it, he has the complete look and also the performance, which is most important. I've stated multiple times that the only real issue that I've ever had with Hugh Jackman is that I felt at 6'2" that he is simply too tall for the character. And they even played on that fact himself, where we see that scene where we see him appearing in the bar with a shortened version, and it looked weird. It was very funny, played for laughs of course, and that was a reference to the fact it's always been too tall for the character. But that's all very fine. And again, this was 3-1, and again, this is probably the stronger part of the film itself. But we then talk about the iconic yellow and blue costume, and we always wondered how exactly would Marvel be able to translate it in live action, essentially when the MCU was in its early days, forging its own path. But of course, as the superhero genre has continued to dominate entertainment and more obscene characters being convincingly portrayed on the big screen, there was no reason at all why Wolverine in this costume couldn't be translated, and I think overall they did a very good job. Yes, we have that ongoing issue of too many segments and parts and textures, but I think overall it works. We have that faded contrast, which probably suits it a bit more because of the bright yellows. Maybe that would be too distracting. But it overall works, and of course, having somebody with the physique with Hugh Jackman also helps. And of course, the most critical element would be the mask itself, and I think overall it works. When he puts it on for the first time and he's standing alongside Deadpool, it takes a short while getting used to, but once it's in live action, we had that extended fight scene when they're fighting all of the multiple Deadpools with Wolverine in the mask on, and I think it works. It works really well, and eventually you just get used to it. So again, we hope that when we eventually see the X-Men enter the MCU, that we will see the character wear the mask far more often. There's no reason for it not to be the case. If they can make it work in this movie, then they can definitely make it work in any future versions that we see later on down the line. So I just think an all-round good job in representing Wolverine, certainly from the aesthetic point of view. I will quickly talk about the overall relationship and dynamic between the two lead characters. And whilst Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman always perform very well within these characters, I do feel that the overall chemistry wasn't quite there between the two characters that I thought it should have been. For the most part, as I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, the banter between them is really more of Deadpool over-talking as what he normally does, which did get annoying at times, and then Wolverine snapping back, growling, grimacing, threatening him. And again, that's part of the characters, yes, but when you have constant scenes of that, it does get a bit repetitive and doesn't quite have the appealing nature that I thought it would have been. And in terms of repetition, I do feel also that having two overextended fight sequences was too much. We had the one in the beginning that we saw within the trailers where they are first appearing within the void, and that was okay, that wasn't too bad, good choreography there. But then we had the second extended sequence where they're in the car, they're driving along, and then Deadpool remarks on the fact that they may not be able to save Wolverine's timeline. It's much more of an educated guess, and this escalates in the back and forth between them before we start fighting. And this is one of the many issues that I had in terms of any element of threat or danger being constantly undercut by the overall jokey humour. So this was meant to be a pivotal moment in terms of the characters by having this intense fight sequence, but then we had to play the song of You're the One That I Want that we all know from the Grease film. And it just doesn't work. It just takes away all of the intensity. And again, it's all played for laughs, which I understand is part of the Deadpool theme. But this really should have been a really serious character-driven moment. And it was just taken away and drained all of the seriousness because we had this musical number playing in the background. And this fight scene seems to go on for a long time. And again, it has no real meaning because we all know both characters can recover from fatal wounds, and of course they're not going to kill each other. What's the point in having them constantly fight each other? It just made the film, I think, a lot longer than what it needed to be. And coming off that, I had another issue in terms of the overextended sequences where the film would make a constant joke 2 times, 3 times, 4 times and keep running with it, and it just ended up wearing especially thin. Now, 2 sequences that they constantly did throughout this film was the one with the slow motion of the dog. This is where we had the dog constantly running through to Wade Wilson. And again, having this for the first time was fine. But they kept doing it again and again and again, and it just didn't carry any weight. As what we had also with the multiple Deadpools. We had that sequence where they come across the alternate version of Wade Wilson, Ryan Reynolds with the long hair, not wearing the mask. And again, the first time this was fine. But this character kept coming back again and again and again. And we had this overextended sequence where they come across this whole army of alternate Deadpools. And we see Wade Wilson using the other Ryan Reynolds as a shield as he's constantly getting shot and blown up to bits. And this scene could have been completely taken out. And it was one example of Ryan Reynolds really going all the way in terms of his own comedic elements. And this is one of the parts where I felt that actually should have been reined in. It just makes the film far too longer than what it needs to be. And again, depending on your preference, you were either laughing constantly at this scene or just groaning and just waiting for the scene to play out so we could get to the end of the overall story. So we'll then come on to the end of the movie where essentially they stop the time variant guy from getting the Time Ripper. They defeat Cassandra Nova. And then we see both Wolverine and Deadpool in his current timeline. Again, it was very confusing as to how exactly Deadpool ended up in the Marvel timeline. There was mention of use of Cavill's time machine. Again, I just glossed over this because I don't think the movie really spent any time fully explaining it. As I mentioned in my non-spoiler review by design, this was just to have Wolverine and Deadpool teaming up without any real substantial story. But they end up saving the day, and then we see Deadpool going back to his own life. And I thought it was very strange that this Logan stayed in the current MCU timeline. So what exactly will happen when exactly we see the X-Men integrated in the MCU? Because surely they will have their own version of Wolverine. You can't keep just bringing back Hugh Jackman again and again and again. It will kind of constrain their own interpretation of the characters. So I did think it was a bit pointless by keeping Hugh Jackman's version around within this timeline rather than have him return to his own setting. So how exactly they'll handle that will be anybody's guess, but we'll see later on down the line. And then we'll quickly mention the end credits, which were nothing really special. As I mentioned before, there was no real tie-in to any future Marvel projects later on down the line. No mention of Fantastic Four or X-Men. But we did get, I suppose, a nice behind-the-scenes footage of the X-Men movies being filmed. We saw behind-the-scenes clips of all of the actors, Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, Halle Berry, Sir Ian McKellen, all talking about their experiences within the X-Men franchise. So that was very nice to see. And in the second end credit scene, basically had Deadpool getting footage of proof that it was indeed Chris Evans' HumanTorch dissing Cassandra Nova, that he didn't make it all up. And that was a very funny sequence as well. And I thought Chris Evans did very well in his overall delivery. Again, nothing substantial, but just very funny, in line in keeping what I thought overall was the best cameo throughout the overall film. So there's my overall thoughts and feelings and spoiler review for Deadpool and Wolverine. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you have any other movies, television series, or any other topics within the pop entertainment and culture scene that you'd like to see me cover within this channel, also let me know and I will see if I can provide that subject matter for you later on down the line within the future. Please consider hitting like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves and I will see you very, very soon.